Comprehensive Planning for Student Success. This is your Module 1, Lesson 1 on Transition Services. We'll start with just a little bit of humor. After 12 years of carrying books to school, you're well prepared for a career in backpacking. This is just a little bit of humor, but in reality, the point here could indicate that without planning and specifically preparing for outcomes after high school, there might not be any, or none worthwhile anyway. Transition services are a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that will prepare the student to move from school to post-school life. They are the services and activities that will help the student develop the skills needed to successfully reach his or her post-secondary goals as outlined. Life is full of transitions. One of the more remarkable ones occurs when we get ready to leave high school and go out in the world as young adults. When the student has a disability, it's especially helpful to plan ahead for that transition. In fact, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, requires it. The focus here is on the legal aspects and student participation. First, let's look at what IDEA has to say about transition services. A transition plan is the section of the IEP, or the Individualized Education Program, that outlines transition goals and services for the student. So the purpose of that transition plan and the planning involved is to help your student prepare to be an independent young adult. The student will be encouraged to attend IEP meetings and play a leading role. In fact, the law requires that the IEP team invites your child or the student to the meetings where transition planning is discussed. You can find this information posted later in the module for further review. If you want to know more about IDEA, go to the ed.gov website to access all federal regulations. Also, a specific guidebook on transition services can be found there. You can see the links here on this page. But first, let's take a second to look at the wording of the law. The law, or IDEA, states that transition services are designed to be a within results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the student with a disability to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, which includes supported employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, and/or community participation. This must be based on the individual child's needs, taking into account the child's strengths, preferences, and interests. The services must address employment, education, and adult living outcomes. These transition services are intended to be coordinated and in sync with the IEP, focusing in academic and functional achievement in a results-oriented process toward post-secondary activities. A purpose of IDEA is to provide a free and appropriate publication, FAPE, through special education to allow for the unique needs of a child with a disability and prepare the child for further education, employment, and independent living. So you can see this is all intertwined between IDEA, the IEP, and the transition services. But students must be at the heart of this planning. Why? Teachers and many other school-based team members won't be there after the student exits the public schools and services under IDEA. You know who will be there? Yep, you guessed it, the student. Transition services are a part of the IEP process intended to focus individualized education programs on preparing students to move from school to adulthood. IDEA requires that transition planning start by age 16, but sooner if possible. Technically, transition services should begin in the 8th grade before a student begins high school. And that doesn't even mean we shouldn't start preparing students from their first day of school for transitions. I would advise all teachers to make continuous efforts to prepare students for future transitions. For example, a student goes to pre-K to prepare them for elementary school. Those little ones must learn what will be expected of them in school academically, socially, behaviorally, emotionally. So pre-K curriculum is set up to provide support in that transition. Children in elementary school must have scaffolds in place along the way to help prepare them for the new expectations academically, socially, behaviorally, and emotionally in middle school. Students with special education services need to begin learning and practicing skills early on so that they can better transition to the next step. The same is true for high school. But once in high school, decisions must be made carefully so that maximum independence and functioning once exiting the system can be realized. This is so important that the law requires the IEP team to begin to include the student, or at least the student's contribution regarding his or her interests, preferences, and areas of strength. That would come in the form of assessments, at minimum. Essentially, the focus turns from considering the student's areas of need or challenge for improvement so that they can access education to a focus on interests, preferences, and areas of strength to use for success in life activities. I mean, let's get real. No one says to him or herself, I'm really not good at math, so I'm going to surround myself with math once I'm an independent adult and all on my own. That's how I'm going to get a high quality of life. I don't think so. No way. We think to ourselves, if I'm going to have some quality of life, I need to do what I like and what I'm naturally good at, and let the computer do the math. Am I right? This concept makes me think of this well-known quote by Confucius. Choose a job you love, and you will never have to work a day in your life. So how do we get there? First, we need to do the transition plan correctly. Transition services. Later, we'll get to the self-determination and student-led IEP pieces that are critical in teaching and supporting the skills a student needs to put that plan in place and generalize it into the real world. But what we have here on this slide are the required component parts of a transition plan. We've nailed down the purpose of the IEP and the transition plan in IDEA, but the first thing we have to do in transition service planning is identify those preferences, strengths, interests, and course of study. And that has to be based on the student's present level of performance and age-appropriate transition assessments. With that information, we're going to, as a team and on a student focus, come up with the desired measurable post-secondary outcomes or completion goals. Then, in order to meet those goals, we set measurable transition IEP goals to give the student activities and services throughout the years that the transition plan and IEP are in effect to move toward the desirable, measurable post-secondary outcomes. We have to identify those persons and agencies that will be involved and the date of completion. So, we have to get the student involved to fully understand the interests and preferences, courses that are leading him or her to a career interest, and other experiences that have been beneficial. Then, the team as a whole decides how to move that forward. This must be related to student assessment. The domains of the transition services include education, training, employment, and independent living if needed. Let's take a look. The IEP team can use a variety of assessment approaches and tools to develop a full picture of a student's abilities and interests. These may include vocational evaluations, achievement tests, such as the Woodcock-Johnson or other statewide assessments, assessment of post-secondary skills, interviews with students and parents, teacher observations. These assessments can help the IEP team plan goals for the student's transition into adulthood. Here are a couple of options for assessments. The academic learning styles and learning preferences can also help a student better understand how education can be best presented to him or her. A vocational assessment is an evaluation that measures a student's interests and abilities in job-related areas. It incorporates information gathered from the student, parent, and teacher utilizing vocational assessment interview forms and a review of school records to determine vocational skills, aptitudes, and interests. Here are some suggested assessments. We have the Occupational Aptitude Survey and Interest Schedules, Self-Directed Search. The ASVAB is an assessment that is often given to all students in high school. Brigance Employability Skills Inventory is something that many school systems have as a standardized assessment protocol. There's the Work Adjustment Inventory, or other Career Game, Red Hot Jobs, Career Decision Making System assessments. For training, also, the ASVAB again can give you good information, perhaps looking at social skills, rating systems, or other social skills assessments. These can help students. And we're going to be talking more about self-determination and self-advocacy assessments in upcoming modules when we get into those sections. Here for independent living, we have different checklists, as well as adaptive behavior assessments that you may already have scores for in student files. And the Brigance, again, has domains that can assess independent living and those functional skills. Now, I know that these are all mostly assessments that are published and have a cost. Your district probably has some of these already purchased. However, you have some other resources online. First of all, the Transition Coalition Assessment Checklist is a nice tool to help you keep track of different assessments and different options and whether you have the assessment available to you, if you need it, if you use it or you don't use it for the student. But it can really help you be organized and see what your options are when you compare with what you may already have in your district. Another helpful tool is the Transition Assessment Matrix from indiana.edu. I found this resource to be pretty cool in that it allows you to break down exactly what you're looking for. So let's say we're looking for some assessment for employment for a middle schooler with autism spectrum disorder. So here are some options. Maybe a volunteer experience reflection, and it gives you the form. So each of these are forms that relate to the specific student and area of transition. Now, this last link that I want you to take a look at is what I call the Transition Assessment Goldmine. It is really great. So let's take a quick look. These links are going to be posted in the module for you, and I hope that you'll pull them back up, save them, check them out, dig in a little bit. This is excellent. This is from South Bend Community School Corporation. This is in Indiana. But this link right here has everything you need. It has a list of downloadable assessments for you. Check it out. All organized by domain and by specific use. So if you want a learning styles inventory, you click here and it's pulled up for you. Printable, savable. Let's see what else. A career cluster interest survey. What might that be? Oh, look. This is a way for you to assess what career interests a student may have. Remember, this is all because the IDEA indicates that the transition services and the transition plan have to be based upon the student's interests and preferences, and the student has to participate. So, of course, we're going to be talking later about how students can actively participate in the meetings, but that's not the only thing. We need to assess students, and we need to make sure that they are at the heart of all that we're doing here with the transition plan services. So let's summarize. What are transition services? Transition planning is a formal process for helping our students with IEPs figure out what they want to do after high school and how to get there. Under IDEA, a student's IEP must include transition services by the time he or she turns 16. However, planning often starts earlier, at least before moving on to high school. It's required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and the IEP, or Individualized Education Program, transition planning is more than just a hopeful exercise of brainstorming session. It's not just extra paperwork. During planning, your students should work on specific goals, but the students will also receive services to help them achieve those goals. In the next lesson, you'll explore some parts of the transition plan and services that highlight the benefits of these services. We'll be answering the question, how does a transition plan help students and teachers? Thank you for your time.